Hello.
Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for some more people to join. Okay, so good afternoon everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Partners for Access. We're delighted to have you join us for an insightful session on navigating joint clinical assessment with PICO Plus. My name is Georgie Rack and I'm your co-host today. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with all registrants afterwards. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature, and we'll address as many as possible during the dedicated Q&A segment at the end. For any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to our support team. So let me briefly introduce Partners for Access, the consultancy behind today's event. We are a global consultancy focused exclusively on access for orphan drugs and ATMPs. Our team works closely with biotech and pharma companies to support everything from early strategy and pricing to HTA submissions and launch excellence. With a passion for innovation and a deep commitment to patients, we're proud to be shaping the future of rare disease access. So without further ado, let's welcome your host today, Darren Callanan.
Thanks very much, Georgie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Darren Callanan. I'm the Global Digital Lead here at Partners for Access. At Partners for Access, we have been monitoring the development of the EU joint HTA process for many years now to better understand what some of the implications might be for our customers. It's been very clear to us that PICO prediction and evidence generation are core JCA preparation activities, and these are both time and resource intensive. When the final procedural guidance for the JCA was published in November of last year, we decided to develop PICO Plus to help make those JCA preparation activities less resource intensive, more efficient, and more accurate. So I'm excited to talk to you about PICO Plus today, but we first need to understand a little bit why it's essential to make your preparation process a little bit more efficient. And to do that, we will be discussing the core principles of the joint clinical assessment, the joint clinical assessment timelines and the potential preparation that's involved. And then I'll show you a little bit about PICO Plus and how that can help make your preparation time a little bit more efficient. And we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions, so please don't hesitate to share those in the chat function. So let's firstly talk about the EU joint clinical assessment. It's the key feature of the joint health technology assessment. And to give it its technical definition, it provides us with the common scientific analysis on the relative effects of new health technologies. There are some core principles behind JCA. At its core, the JCA is a joint undertaking. So it's joint work, common scientific and clinical aspects of HTA. The assessments are driven by the member state bodies who come together to co-produce the high quality clinical evaluations. And importantly, while these clinical assessments are now going to be harmonized moving forward, each country is going to retain their sovereignty over decisions around value judgment and pricing and reimbursement. So the JCA is very collaborative, but it isn't prescriptive. Next, let's talk about efficiency. So the JCA is designed to produce timely and transparent joint assessments, and these outputs are intended to be directly informing national HTA processes. So without duplicating effort, and that is intended to improve speed to decisions. So developing this single high quality clinical assessment at the European level, countries and manufacturers are theoretically supposed to be able to reduce the time spent creating similar analyses at the national level. And we're already starting to see the HTA agencies aligning their internal processes to better make use of the JCA outputs and make themselves more efficient. Finally, let's consider the role of standardization. So one of the main objectives of the joint clinical assessment is to introduce greater consistency across countries in how evidence is assessed. It doesn't mean that every country is going to take the same decision, but it does mean that we are all going to be starting from the same scientific base. And the JCA is built to support that. And it sets out clear templates, timelines, and procedural standards for joint assessments. So they're really the core principles behind the joint clinical assessment. Now let's have a look at the timings for the JCA. I'm sure you've all seen versions of a graphic like this before, but there are a few points that are really worth reiterating. As we all know, JCA happens in parallel with your regulatory assessment, but this means that similar to your regulatory package, you need to have your JCA package prepared well in advance, and that's without full knowledge of what might be required from the JCA process. In an accelerated pathway like we have here, there will be just 60 days from the JCA subgroup giving you notification of the consolidated list of PICOs that you need to submit for you to fill your dossier with all the data and analysis to respond to each PICO requested. With that in mind, there are many activities that need to happen well in advance of submission. First of all, your hypothesis development on topics like burden of disease, standard of care, all the things that help you to inform your strategy shaping. You'll have to do some PICO scenario planning to understand what each member state HTA is likely to request evidence on. And then you're going to have to look at the evidence generation planning and think about what methods you can use to address some of the PICOs in the event that not everything can be answered with the evidence package that's going to be available from your clinical trials. So we're going to focus on the PICO scenario planning for this webinar. This process is obviously complex. It involves multiple stages, and it is very time intensive and resource intensive from a global perspective, regional, and from local affiliate perspective. And there are many steps that you might want to take. So firstly, you're going to want to develop your PICO strategy and your internal process. You're going to want to understand how you're going to get all the information that you need from across your organization into a process that is efficient. You're going to need to get affiliate input to get a well-rounded local perspective. However, not all affiliates have the same level of resources to commit to a process like this. They may lack the therapeutic expertise in a new asset that you might want to bring to the market. And so they can't make informed decisions on what the local PICO requests are likely to be. And in some instances, the affiliates might not exist. There just might be markets where there isn't an affiliate presence. However, in a process like this, assuming you have had some affiliate feedback, you'll want to do some consolidation exercises. So basically mimic the JCA methodology on consolidation to get your shortlist, shall we call it, of PICOs. And you'll want to take that shortlist to be externally validated to ensure the robustness of the data. So taking it to KOLs, take it to proxy payers, for example, to ensure that these PICOs mimic what HTAs are likely to request. Then you might want to do something like a feasibility assessment to help gauge whether the data exists to respond to the likely PICOs and what evidence can be generated using methods that might be acceptable to the different HTA agencies. And then you might want to do some risk assessment and mitigation planning. And this really comes into play where there's potential that PICOs that have been requested or are likely to be requested can't be addressed in the JCA dossier. And finally, we have our clinical development input or our evidence generation planning, where the evidence requirements that we've identified through this PICO simulation process can be shared with the cross-functional teams for discussion on the best routes forward. So I think it's clear to see that there is a lot of effort involved. These steps require significant resources, significant time, and that brings us to how we can help streamline that process with tools like PICO Plus. So firstly, PICO Plus can help reduce the burden on affiliates by generating PICO tables for them to validate, rather than them requiring them to create. If you can imagine asking an affiliate team to sit down and sift through dozens potentially of HTA documents and clinical guidelines to identify relevant PICOs in a consistent way, capture, assess their comments, extrapolate that across multiple affiliates, it's obviously going to be a huge time drain. But as we're going to be creating the tables in advance, it gives the affiliates something to react to rather than to create. And because we can generate these tables automatically, it gives us opportunity to do things like testing different wording combinations and the impact that might have on PICOs without overburdening all your affiliate teams. Secondly, PICO Plus can speed up the consolidation process. By automatically removing duplicates and following the JCA consolidation guidance, we can get down to that consolidated list quite efficiently. And thirdly, PICO Plus can expedite the feasibility and risk assessment by extracting all the relevant HTA commentary on components like comparator selection or ITC methodology from all the HTA precedents. So this frees up time for the more human-centered approaches that are like mitigation strategy development. So how does PICO Plus provide the instant insights? I'm going to show you the structure overview, and this will give you some insight as to how those insights are created. So first, we start with a high-level product indication, and we filter for the population filters that we want to, features that we want to include or exclude. So from there, we identify the relevant data from HTA reports, regional and local clinical guidelines, and other key documents, meaning you have to spend less time sifting through mountains of data. Our large language model protocol has extracted thousands of documents and uses a tagging system to ensure that only the most relevant source data is returned for us to continue on through the model. Next, PICO Plus extracts all the relevant PICO component information from that source data and organizes it into tables and dashboards that allows us the flexibility to dive into the sources, the rationale, what countries that PICOs are coming from. This data is then assessed against clinical guidelines, and a ranking system is applied so that we make sure that we're getting the right quality data back. So we use this really as a sense check rather than a tiering of the outputs. And finally, PICO Plus then generates reports for all the PICOs identified into summary tables that are easily digestible and ready for external validation. However, as we've created an LLM protocol to extract more information from HTA reports, we can get additional data like HTA outcomes of precedents or comparators, or really anything that's related to the HTA assessment. As you can imagine, this process significantly reduces the resource burden, as to do this manually would require an awful amount of time from your local affiliates. As we use HTA reports and the most recent clinical guidance, PICO Plus is accurate. We validated against published JCA subgroup exercises, and PICO Plus achieved a high degree of matching against those published exercises. So this means that the insights we're generating are reliable and they can be used with confidence. So what I'm showing here is a toned down version of what a PICO report looks like. Finally, we use this for external validation or for use with your affiliates. So in this example, we're looking at a higher risk MDS population, and we're only looking in 3 countries. And PICO Plus gives us the flexibility to do that, to look at individual or multiple countries at a time. The executive summary that we're showing here, it provides a text-based overview of some of the highlights of the insights that have been identified. And then the PICOs that are identified are then summarized into singular tables. We then provide the audience with a summary of the inputs that have been used to drive some of the identifying the relevant PICOs. So in this case, on the left-hand side, we have the proposed indication, the indication input, the population features that we wanted to filter for, and the weights that we attributed to those. And on the right-hand side, We have some notes on the assumptions that we've used and some of the sources that we found as well. And then for each PICO that's identified, we generate a table like this. So this describes the PICO, their rationale as extracted from precedent HTA or from clinical guidelines, the benefit rating or the HTA outcome of the comparator in countries where that's included, and importantly, the sources for each component as well. We also get this visual aid of where this PICO might apply to, which HTA agency might be looking for a PICO like this, which is strategically quite important. And PICO Plus can generate this report content in moments. So it's a real driver of efficiency in the PICO prediction process. If we wanted to go back and change any of the wording on the population filters, we could generate a report literally in seconds. So in conclusion, the JCA timelines are so tight, preparation really is required well in advance of EMA submission, ideally well in advance of pivotal trial design. Those preparations must include some sort of PICO simulation exercise, as PICOs are the engine that drive the joint clinical assessment. The simulation exercises can be time and resource intensive, and given the importance of identifying the correct PICOs for future HTA success, time is required to make this process right. But as many companies don't have the resources to commit to these exercises, tools to drive efficiencies are definitely required. And that's where PICO Plus can improve the processes that you need to run through. With resource savings, fewer tasks requiring manual effort, teams can focus on aspects of the JCA that do require human expertise. We can improve accuracy with a high match rate to the published JCA subgroup exercises using the most recent HTA outputs, the most recent clinical guidance. PICO Plus helps ensure that decisions are based on solid, accurate, referenceable data. And through time savings, by automating the data extraction and analysis, what would normally have taken days across multiple affiliates can now be done in minutes. And if you want to see how quick this really is, I'd love for you to put us to the test. Do get in touch. I'd love to show you how quickly this can be done. Of course, PICO Plus is part of a larger set of activities that are required for JCA preparation. And we've built up our in-house expertise to help support our customers from PICO prediction all the way through to launch and beyond. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join the session. I hope this demonstration gives you a better understanding of how PICO Plus can support your work. And yeah, I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thanks, Darren, for your great presentation. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll kick off with the first one. Which countries' HTA decisions are you considering as references?
Fantastic question. So we've had to take a pragmatic approach to the countries that we've included in the baseline PICO model. So those are countries which have HTAs that are available, it's transparent, they're influencers of clinical guidance and a general sense that what they put in their HTAs is reflected in other markets. So we currently have 8 large markets included. So you've France, Germany, Italy, Spain. We have the UK, we have Sweden, the Netherlands, and Canada. And you might be asking, well, why have you included the UK and Canada? Well, they have a HTA process which is available and transparent for us to test against, but also in less mature HTA markets, they reference those markets quite often when determining what good looks like in terms of clinical guidance. So that's why they've been included in the model. That being said, that was a pragmatic approach of what made sense for building our large language model, etc. If there are individual countries that aren't included in those 8 that need to be included, that's not a problem. The process would work in the same way. We would just simply go and extract all the relevant data from a country that we haven't included in our first pass.
Perfect, thank you. And the next question, how do you approach situations where there is no existing HTA precedent for a particular indication?
Oh, that's a super question. When we were designing the model itself, the simulation tool itself, it was one of the first questions that really we asked ourselves, especially as we work in orphan disease and where there might be fewer HTAs in which to reports in which to extract from. So really what we do is we look at the clinical guidance, so local and regional, and then we apply our P4A expertise on what the outcomes might look like. So we extract comparators from the guidance, and then we extract what the outcomes might look like from our experience of what HTAs show preferences for.
Okay, we've got a few more questions coming in, Darren.
Perfect.
How do you handle variations in HTA documentation and requirements across different countries?
How do we handle variations in HTA? Okay, great question. So our brilliant data analyst, Sebastian Sanso at Partners for Access is responsible for that. And really what he's done is created the large language model that is able to look at within HTA documents. So if we say, take the GBA for Germany, a very structured, standardized approach, and where the data is contained within each report is very clear. So it's quite easy to do that, and we can extract from there. But in other countries, there's semantic differences in how things are described and where they are. So we've used this kind of text vectorization approach, not to be too technical, to make sure that we're reading through those documents efficiently and extracting the right data. So that way we're able to make sure that we're comparing apples with apples across HTAs, as it were. So yeah, it took a lot of work to make sure that semantic differences were accounted for when we were developing the model.
They're coming in thick and fast, Darren. Okay, you ready for the next one?
Let's go.
PICO Plus be used to identify the gaps in evidence in order to achieve similar or better reimbursement decisions in a given market?
Yeah, so absolutely, great question. Because we're using this kind of HTA extraction approach, we can apply a methodology to that where we can look at, we already are getting the outcomes from comparators, for example, and precedents. And we can look at, well, what was the evidence behind that? So we're also extracting the clinical trial. I don't know if that came across, but we're able to show basically what magnitude of benefit over a comparator drove that outcome. And so you can extrapolate that to say, well, for our asset in the scenario, we're going to have this level of benefit. What is that going to look like from our HTA outcome? So yeah, absolutely possible to do that very efficiently.
Okay, and then another one. What are your offerings across the EU JCA process from PICOs to dossier development?
So of that process wheel that I showed you, we can be involved in all of that and helping you establish what your process could and should look like, for helping you identify what the PICOs are, for getting your affiliates aligned as well, and doing that's the kind of simulated survey with your affiliates. External validation, we have a Max Connect network of KOLs and payers that we can leverage to get validation fairly instantly on the outputs, and the risk mitigation and feasibility pieces of work very much within our wheelhouse here at Partners for Access. A dossier preparation absolutely is something that we can be involved in too. So yeah, I would say we have a full suite of services available to support across your kind of PICO prediction and JCA preparation.
Thanks, Darren. Okay. How long does it take for PICO Plus to return relevant data?
Seconds.
Okay.
The real benefit of the approach that we've taken is that we've done all the heavy lifting on the extraction and the building of the algorithms, etc. And so when we input an indication and we look at the population features within that indication that we're interested in, we literally click model and it brings up all the relevant data for us. And from there, it can be organized within, well, it is already pre-organized in different dashboards, etc. So we can look at it from different perspectives. So we can look at it from a country perspective. We can look at it across all the JCA. We can look at the clinical guidelines. We can look at the clinical trials that underpinned some of the comparators as well. So you get a sense of what, if a HTA agency was making a comment about a trial design, you can go and see, well, what was the trial design that was used and that. So that was, it takes seconds, literally.
Thank you. And that's it for the questions at the moment. Unless any of our attendees have any other questions, you can either raise your hand or pop it into the Q&A feature at the bottom. We'll just give a minute for that just in case. No? Okay. So that brings us to the end of today's session. A really, really big thank you to Darren for sharing such valuable insights and to all of you for joining us. We hope this session has helped you better understand the evolving JCA landscape and how tools like PICO Plus can support smarter, faster decisions as you prepare for launch. If you have any follow-up questions or would like a more in-depth look at PICO Plus, feel free to reach out. We'd love to continue the conversation, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to your inbox shortly. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Partners for Access event.